Hey, what's up everyone? John here with WebDev for you, here to help you build awesome websites without code in Webflow. Today we're going to be building this menu button animation on click. It is a Lottie animation, so this button can add a bit more depth to a website rather than just a static button. We can have a nice animated button, and hopefully the tips and techniques that I show in this video will give you some ideas of some other things that could be possible using the techniques covered in this video. So we are going to use so first we're going to build this path in Illustrator, then we're going to bring it into After Effects, we're going to animate it in After Effects, and then we're going to use the body movement plugin to export the animation as a .json file, which we can then drag and drop into Webflow as a Lottie animation, and then animate the click interaction with the interactions function in Webflow. So I know that sounded like a lot, but it's just a few little different steps there. So this is what we will be building today. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing I'll do is go into Illustrator. I'll create a new artboard. I'm going to set this artboard to 200 pixels by 140 because the button is wider than the cross. So we need a bit more width than height. So here I'll click create, and we have this artboard. I'll go ahead and select the rectangle tool, and we'll just create a rectangle. And I'll change the width and the height here for this rectangle. This is where you can get creative. You can create any type of cross or icon or anything you'd like here. We are going to transform it in Webflow. In this case, it does have to be a cross because of the way we're going to transform it, but you could set the cross to be, thinner. I'm going to set it to 35 by 100 because I find it makes a nice thick cross, but depending on the design of your site, you could want a thinner one, like, 20 pixels by 100. It all depends. And we can resize this in After Effects. So as long as you get the proportions correct, as far as like the thickness or the thinness of each bar in the cross, you'll still be able to resize it and kind of do all of that in either After Effects, and then in Webflow, it's all resizable. You just want kind of the thickness correct here as far as like your specific design. But for me, I want kind of a thicker cross, and I find it works well with like the morphing into the button. So 35 pixels by 100. I'm going to go ahead and set the fill to black and the stroke to none. Okay. So I have this bar here. I'm just going to select this bar, hit Command C to copy, and then paste. So I have two here. And on my keyboard, I'm going to select R and then enter, and that brings up the rotation tool. And I'm going to rotate this one 45 degrees, and then I'm going to select the second bar, select R on my keyboard, then enter, and I'm going to rotate this negative 45 degrees. I'll select both of these bars or rectangles and just use the align tool to center them, and then we have the cross. That's kind of what I was mentioning. You do want to make sure you have the proper width of each rectangle before you rotate it, because as you can see, the width and the height change when we rotate it. So that's just something to be aware of. That all depends. You want to make sure like the design is correct before you rotate it and stuff like that. All right, so we have the two rectangles, and now I want to convert this into a single path because in After Effects, we're going to use one single path to animate it. So what we can do is use the Pathfinder tool right here. If you don't see this Pathfinder tool, you can go to Window and click on Pathfinder. All right, cool. And I'll go ahead and select this first option, which is click to unite. And it just unites those rectangles into one path. So if I select the direct selection tool, we can now see we have this cross, and it's one single path. All right, and I'll center this cross in the artboard just using the align tool. And there we go. That's the first step. Just create the cross in Illustrator, and I'll go ahead and go to File, Save, and I'll save it to my computer on the desktop, and I'll call this cross, and I'll click OK. Cool. So step 1 is done. Then we'll go on to step 2, which is create or animate the cross in After Effects. So in After Effects, I'm going to right click, create a new composition. If you first open After Effects, you should see the composition settings pop up automatically. And I'm just going to call this Animated Button. Again, I'm going to set the width and height to the same thing I set it in Illustrator, just to keep it consistent. So it's going to be a width of 200 and a height of 140. The frame rate 29 by 97, and that looks good. The background color, I'm going to set it to white. I'll click OK, and we have our composition, and we have these grids here. So let me first drag and drop the Illustrator file. So I'm going to click, hold, and drag into Illustrator. I'm going to choose a layer, and I'm just going to choose this first layer, and I'll click OK, and footage here is OK. Click OK, and there we have the cross, and I'll just center it in here. Okay, so yeah, that was dragging and dropping into After Effects, and don't mind my dog there in the background. So one thing I want to do here for this cross, I want to resize it so that these points are matching up with a grid intersection. These grids are very important because we're going to, in order to get like a perfect morph, I want to snap the points of the cross with the points of the rectangle for the menu button. And yeah, this would go for any other type of animation you want to create as far as like morphing it into something else. Where the points are located will make for like a seamless morph. And this will be a bit more clear in a second. So yeah, let me zoom in here. We have the composition. So if you don't see these grid cells, you can go to After Effects, Preferences, go to Grids and Guides, and here you can set a grid line for me, I'm setting it every 10 pixels. So that's why the artboard is 200 by 140, because 10 goes into 200 perfectly and it goes into 140 perfectly. You can add subdivisions into each grid cell, but in this case I don't need it. I just want to put the points at every 10 pixel intersection. So for subdivisions, I'm just leaving it at 1. So here I'll click OK. And yeah, and then we have these grid cells. And if you don't see them appear on the composition, you can click on this button right down here and select grid. Or you can go to View and say Show Grid. And you also want to make sure that Snap to Grid is selected, because we want to snap the path to the grid. All right, so I'm going to resize this cross here so that it fills up more of the composition. So I'm going to hold down Shift to resize from the center and just select it. And I'm going to resize it until the corners of the cross are pretty much hitting an intersection of the grid cells. So we can see here, there's an intersection here, 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 right here. Like it's all meeting kind of a grid intersection. Okay, and this is just going to make it easy to snap each point to the grid. And this, I'll showcase this in a second. I just realized my face is in the way, so I'll just put it up here. Yeah, so this is the Illustrator file we dragged and dropped. So I just dragged it and dropped it in this area where my face was. And yeah, so now what we want to do is right click on this Illustrator file, click on Create, and then select Create Shapes from Vector Layer. Okay, and this converts the Illustrator file into a shape layer in After Effects. And I'll just rename this layer to Animated Button. And I'll go ahead and open the contents. And right now it's in a group. I actually don't want it to be a group because it's just a single path. So I'm going to right click on group and select ungroup shapes. Sometimes when it's in a group, the path doesn't perfectly snap to the grid. So just if you find that's the case when you're trying to snap the points to the grid, just make sure that it's not grouped. Okay, so I'll select the path here, and notice we have the different points of the path. So I can move this path and notice how it snaps to each grid intersection. It's just nicely snapping. Okay, so I'm gonna make sure that each point of this cross is snapping with the grid intersection. Okay, so I'm just moving it slightly and just snapping in there. Perfect. Nice. So still retaining its, perfect aspect or perfect dimensions. We're just like slightly adjusting each point on the grid. All right, so that looks good. And this right here. And this bottom one, yeah. Cool. So that looks good. All the points are snapped. And now we can morph it. So to morph this cross, we'll just select the path right up here, or this path here, and we'll select the stopwatch to add a keyframe. So we'll add the keyframe there, and then we'll fast forward about 10 frames, and we'll just move these points, right? So I'll select the path, and I'll just move these points. So I'll move it all the way here, and I'll move, I'll move this point over here, and this one over here, and we'll move this point over here, and here, and here, and then we'll move these down. Okay, and you can hold down shift to make sure that it moves vertically or horizontally in a straight line if you hold down shift. All right, that looks good. Okay, and that's basically it. So now we've morphed this cross into a rectangle. And I'm actually going to take the cross keyframe and place it after the rectangle. So I'll place the rectangle at the beginning and then the cross at the end. So initially it starts as a rectangle, and if I play, it turns into the cross. So yeah, that's basically it for morphing this rectangle into a cross, and looks good. For this, I do want to add a bit of easing. So on my keyboard, I can hold down Fn or F9, or Fn and then F9, or I can select these keyframes, right click, select keyframe assistant, and then select easy ease. And if we go to the graph editor, I'm looking at the speed graph. If you don't see the speed graph, you can select this option right here and select edit speed graph. And we just have this nice curve for the easing, and that just gives us a smoother animation. All right, so that part is done. The next thing I want to do is change the color of this rectangle, so from gray to black. So I'll open up the fill option right in here for the animated button. I'll add a keyframe at color, and we'll go to 10 frames and add another keyframe, or add a keyframe there for black at 10 frames, then go to 0, and then we'll change this keyframe to kind of a gray color. So let's see. Yeah, something like this. So it'll go from gray to black. Okay. And again, we want to add the easing, so I'll select these keyframes. Keyframe assistant, say easy ease. So we want the easing of the color change to be the same as the movement. So it creates a consistent animation. All right, so that's basically it. Hopefully that was kind of clear to follow through with everything. I'll just recap a little bit. So first, we created the vector or the path in Illustrator. We saved it. I saved it to my desktop. Then I dragged and dropped into After Effects, and we resized the After Effects so that it matched more the grids in After Effects. And then I right-clicked, create shapes from vector layer, and it created a path. So we had a path. Then I just adjusted the path to match the grid perfectly. And then using the path option here, we animated it into a rectangle, again using the grid points to make sure everything snaps precisely. And that's it. Cool. So now that we've done that, I can go ahead and go to Window, Extensions, Body Moving. And if you don't see this extension, you can go to Window, Find Extensions on Exchange, and Body Moving is like one of the first ones at the top there. Okay, so I'll go ahead and select this animated button, and I'll save it to the desktop, and I'll call this Animated Button. And yeah, so I have it selected and desktop, and then I'll click render. And oh, one thing I didn't do actually, we want to make the length of this animation only like 11 frames. So you want to make it one frame more than the actual animation, because for some reason, if it's exactly, if I change the length of this animation to exactly 10 frames, it tends to get cut off in Webflow. So you just want to go one frame extra there. So just drag this this bar here and just make it like 11 frames for the animation. So now I'll go to Window, Extensions, Body Moving, and I'll select the animated button, click Render, click Done, and let's go into Webflow. All right, so I have this project here. I'll just go ahead and create a new page, and I'll just call this demo. And we have this demo here. I'll go ahead and add a section in Webflow, make the min height 100 VH so it fills the entire viewport. Then I'll give it a flex setting of flex, center, center, and I'll add a div block, and I'll call this menu button wrapper. And I'll drag and drop the .json file into this div block. So I have it here. This is my desktop, and I'll click, hold, and drag and place the animated button into the div block. So we can see it here. If I preview, we can see it turns into the X in Webflow. Let me open up OBS here again. Okay, cool. All right, so far so good. So let's add some text here in the center. Yeah, actually I'll showcase this in a second. So let me select the menu button wrapper. I want to give it a flex setting of flex, center, center, so that when we add the text, it's in the center. And I'll add an element. I'll add a text block, and I'm going to set this text block to an position of absolute. So it just goes in front of the button, and I'll call this menu button text, and I'll call it menu button text too, because I already used that class name for the first demo. And I'll just double click in here and say menu. Let me go ahead and restyle this. Let's just select, a different font here, change the color. Let me resize the text, give it some letter spacing, and boom. So there we have the text. I'll resize it a little bit more, something like this. And we'll make it unitless for the line height, set it to 1. And there we have the button. So right now the text doesn't look perfectly centered. Actually, it looks pretty good. So let me give this Lottie animation a class name. I'm going to give it Lottie animation 2 because I used the class name Lottie animation in the first demo. So one thing you can do to make sure that everything is precise as far as centering is giving this Lottie animation the same width and height that it had for the composition and the artboard. So it was 200 by 140, and it just adjusts it ever so slightly. For some reason, I think when adding the JSON file into Webflow, there's like a little bit of margin at the bottom, which throws off the alignment of the button if trying to align with other elements. So now the text is perfectly centered, the button looks good, and now we just need to animate it on click, right? So we're going to animate the button on click, and we're going to scale in this text and scale it out. So I'll select the menu button wrapper, go into interactions. On the element trigger, I'll click the plus. I'll say on mouse click or tap. I'm going to start an animation. I'll click the plus here to create a new animation, and I'll call this Lottie Button Animation In. Yeah, Lottie Button Animation In. And for this, I'll select the Lottie animation, and we can look at the navigator here to make sure it's selected. Click the plus, and I'll select Lottie for integrations. And for the Lottie animation, I'm going to play it to 100% so it plays through. I'm going to set the duration, 0.5 is okay. And then I'll select the text, and I'll say scale, and I'll scale it to 0, and I'll give it an easing of ease. And I'll click, hold, and drag so that they start together. So let's preview. When I click, it turns into an X. So let's change the speed of both of these to like 0.3 so it's a little bit quicker. So I click, and we have the X. 0.3 is still a little bit too slow, maybe 0.2. No, 0.3 was good. All right, so that looks pretty good. Or let's do 0.25. Yeah, I like that. Okay, I'll save, and then we'll say on second click, we'll start an animation. I'll go ahead and duplicate the Lottie Button Animation In, and I'll just call this Lottie Button Animation Out. Okay, yep. And then for the Lottie animation, we'll play it back to 0, so it plays in reverse. And then for the scale, I'm going to set it back to 1 for the text, so the text scales back in. So on first click, it turns into an X. Second click, the text scales back in, and the X turns into a button. And that's basically it. So that's how we animated that Lottie animation, and we animated the text. And the last thing I'll do is add a cursor to the menu button wrapper. So with the menu button wrapper selected, I'll go to the cursor and select pointer. So when I click, we have that pointer so the user knows that they can click, and easy. Nice. So the last thing we'll do is just make it interact with the menu, and let me place my face. So hopefully my face wasn't too much in the way. It could have been. So yeah, interactions was right over here, and let me see just how much my face was in the way there. Let me just check. Yeah, it was a little bit. You could still see a lot of what I did, but yeah, let me know if that was an issue, because that's kind of not great. So I do have to pay attention of where this little box is. So let's see. Yeah, no, I think it's okay. Like anything here at the top that my face was covering was just me renaming the interaction. And when I created the interaction, I did go to element trigger and select mouse click right here. So mouse click and then start an animation, and we created, click the plus, and then we created the interaction. So yeah, and I'll delete this here. Okay, so yeah, we have the button that looks good, and let's create the menu. So I'll click the plus, I'll select div block, and I'll place this div block in the body. I'll call this menu wrapper. Set it to a position of fixed and full, and we'll change the background color to, let's set it to blue, not the font color, the background color. Okay, so we have the menu wrapper. So what I'll do is select the menu button wrapper, go to interactions, click the interaction, and then I'll select the menu wrapper, and I'll say move. So initially we're going to move negative 100%. So moves all the way up, and I'll set it as the initial state. So initially we can't see it. Then I'll move it, set it back to 0%. So it comes from the top to the bottom, and I'll start it with the on-click interaction. Then we'll go into the second click, and I'll select the menu wrapper, say move, and we'll move it back to negative 100%. And for the easing, let's say ease, and I'll start it with the other animations. The duration, I'll say 0.3. So I'll go into the first one, and I'll say 0.3 as well, or 0.25. Okay, save, and set this to 0.25. Okay, so I click, the menu comes from the top to the bottom, and we have that nice animation. All right, so that's basically it. Yeah, let me know if my face was covering too much of the interaction section. I'll go ahead, either cover it in my live videos, or just do a quick recap of this this demo. So yeah, I'm still learning kind of this OBS system, and I do want to show my face and stuff, but I realize that sometimes my face covers specific parts of the screen, so I'll definitely be more aware of that to make sure I'm not covering any important aspects of the build. Yeah, so that's it for this animation. This video went a little longer than I thought it would. So again, After Effects, then Illustrator, then After Effects, animate it in After Effects, export it in using body moving, drag and drop into Webflow, and then apply the interaction in Webflow, and you can have the button trigger specific other elements on your site. Yeah, so hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you have any further questions, and I'll be happy to help. Also, tune in to my weekly live streams. They're Monday through Thursday, every Monday through Thursday. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Central. I cover everything Webflow. We go over different topics. If you need support with your site, or you have questions about Webflow, there is the super chat function, so you can send me a super chat, and I can go through helping you with your website. I can actually, if you send a read-only link, I can go through your site, and if you're struggling with a specific aspect of Webflow, I can show you what I would do as far as the website build. Yeah, so that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video tutorial. Thank you.